All right, so this is the second video in the series on World War II. We are way over here. Here we are, right there. So this one is entitled Japan's Pacific Campaign, if you'd find that section in your notes, and we'll go through that and see how the Japanese got aggressive in the Pacific, similarly to how the Germans got aggressive in Europe. All right. A couple of ways that the Japanese got aggressive in the Pacific, and that a couple of examples of how the United States tried to restrict what the Japanese was doing in the Pacific was that they, as ironic as this sounds today, because things have changed over time, the Chinese were helped by the Americans to help defend against the Japanese. And so interesting how history has a way of changing. All right, another one that's super ironic considering what's going on today is that the United States impacted Japan by cutting off the supply of oil to it. As Japan doesn't have a lot of natural resources on their island, and so they have to import a lot. And that's one reason why they expanded, and one reason they were dependent on the United States for oil, particularly for their modernized society. So that's kind of an interesting turn of events there. All right, so the Japanese decided, with these restrictions that were put on them that hindered their goals for expansion into the Pacific, the way to solve this problem was that they needed to attack the colonies that belonged to European countries all at one time. They didn't believe that they were strong enough to go head to head or to have a long drawn out war, but if they could attack multiple places at the same time in a surprise type of way, then that would give them the advantage they needed to accomplish their goals. And the individual who planned the Pearl Harbor part of this multi-pronged attack into the Pacific was General Yamamoto. And if you look at your vocab words, that's the first one there. The general who planned that attack, Yamamoto. All right, and the date that this attack happened, this is a famous date because of what it is, and then also because of Roosevelt's famous speech. This was December 7th, 1941, when Pearl Harbor was attacked, and did a lot of damage on the United States. It's the 1940s equivalent of September 11th in a lot of sense. Several thousand people died. It was pretty devastating. All right, other places that were attacked at the same time as Pearl Harbor. As Americans, we focus on the Pearl Harbor part, but there were other places that got attacked simultaneously as well. Some of these are American holdings in the Pacific, some are not, but Guam, Wake Island, Hong Kong, and the Philippines were also attacked simultaneously while Pearl Harbor was being attacked. I go now. All right, this was done in the Philippines when the Japanese landed on the Philippines and they pushed out all of the American soldiers that were there. They captured a lot of those soldiers who didn't escape, and they forced them to march all the way to the coastline. And if you've been to the Philippines, it's hot, it's humid, and they didn't give them adequate water or food, and a lot of these people died on their way to the coast. It's kind of like the Trail of Tears in a sense in the United States, but a different context. But it's a long march and a lot of people died. It's just an example of how the Japanese treated prisoners of war in the Pacific. They're notoriously brutal. So forced to walk to the coast, a lot of these soldiers died. All right, a lesser known attack. This is called the Doolittle Raid. This was, if you've seen the movie Pearl Harbor before, this little incident was captured at the end of it. But this was a tiny little attack compared to Pearl Harbor, where the United States sailed an aircraft carrier close enough to Japan to drop a few bombs over Japan after Pearl Harbor, and it was largely a symbolic victory, but at least gave the United States some increased patriotism, and also realized the Japanese caused them to realize that they're more vulnerable than maybe they thought. All right, these are the main leaders in World War II for different soldiers. You got MacArthur here, the president, Roosevelt here, and then this guy, Chester Nimitz. He's the one we're going to look at first. He is in charge of all of the ships and the soldiers on those ships in the Pacific Fleet. So that whole main thing is his responsibility. So Chester Nimitz. All right, the battle in the Pacific that really changed the tide, it was Japanese victory, Japanese victory, Japanese victory, and then the Battle of Midway was the turning point in the war in the Pacific, and that was because the Americans broke the Japanese code and knew where the battle was going to be and were able to position their ships accordingly. I don't 100% understand how you can do a surprise attack on the ocean, but I guess it's possible. So, and then also the Japanese lost several aircraft carriers during this battle, which was a really important mechanism for launching planes to greater distances in the war in the Pacific, and so that really crippled their fleet. All right, General MacArthur, right here. So General MacArthur, go up to our definitions. Battle of Midway you could have gotten. That was the decisive battle in the Pacific. And MacArthur was the leader of the ground troops in the Pacific. So when they got off the ships and they fought on land, MacArthur was in charge of them. And he developed this strategy. If you've seen a map of the Pacific, there's islands everywhere. Like Indonesia is known as the land of 1,000 islands. I think I've heard that before. So there's lots of islands, and if you were to take every single little island, that would be very time consuming and not always productive. So MacArthur developed this strategy he called island hopping. They would hop to strategic islands and skip other ones on their way to getting closer and closer strategically to be able to attack Japan. So ironically enough, this actually left some Japanese soldiers stranded on islands, and they were cut off from communication, so they didn't know. So they were holding out, thinking the war was still going well beyond its end date of 1945. There's also probably some really neat World War II relics on islands in the Pacific too that no one's discovered yet. All right, the first battle hopped to was the Battle of Guadalcanal. Guadalcanal. A lot of jungle fighting in the Pacific. First offensive battle of the Pacific from the United States perspective. And the Japanese Air Force was permanently damaged. This Guadalcanal base was taken, seriously hindering the Japanese ability to mount full-scale war in the Pacific.